They said the Virgin Planet was theirs by ancient law, 10,000 warships descending like steel clouds to seal the claim. But when the Imperium's vanguard touched down in the meadow, they found a human girl sitting cross-legged beside a metal pole, eating an apple and smiling like she'd won a game no one else knew they were playing. The girl who planted flags. Mira Okonkwo had been alone on Verdes 7 for 43 hours when the sky turned silver. She sat on a flat stone near the creek, boots off, toes wiggling in the cool water. The air smelled like mint and rain, even though it hadn't rained yet, some quirk of the planet's chemistry that made everything feel like spring. Around her, the meadow stretched wide and soft, dotted with violet flowers she hadn't named yet. The mountains in the distance were blue-black and jagged, their peaks lost in clouds that never seemed to move. She'd planted the flag that morning, a simple aluminum pole 2 meters tall with a small transmitter embedded in the base. The flag itself was white canvas, hand-stitched with a blue circle and 5 stars, the emblem of the Terran Pioneer Corps. It looked humble compared to the Baroque banners she'd seen in old hollows of the Imperium's conquest fleets. But that was the point. Mira bit into the apple, one of 6 she'd brought from the lander, and watched the ships descend. They came in waves, each vessel the size of a city block, their hulls etched with glowing glyphs that shifted and pulsed. The lead ship was a dreadnought, its prow shaped like a talon. It settled onto the meadow 100 meters from her creek, engines hissing, landing struts crushing the flowers beneath. The sound was enormous, metal groaning, air compressing, the hum of anti-grav coils winding down. Mira finished her apple and tossed the core into the creek. She pulled her boots back on, stood, and walked toward the ship. By the time she reached the edge of its shadow, a ramp had extended. Armored figures marched down in perfect formation, 20 of them, each wearing exosuits that gleamed like oil slicks. Their helmets were faceless, save for a single red lens where the eyes should be. Behind them came a figure in robes, tall and thin, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed faint gold. The robed figure stopped 10 paces from Mira. The soldiers fanned out, rifles raised but not aimed. The figure tilted its head, studying her. "You are human," it said. Its voice was low, sonorous, like a bell struck underwater. "Yep," Mira said. She slipped her hands into her jacket pockets. "Mira Okonkwo, Terran Pioneer Corps." "Nice to meet you." The figure's eyes brightened. "This world is claimed by the Calith Imperium under the doctrine of first presence. Our scouts identified it 17 cycles ago. Our fleet has traveled 600 parsecs to secure it. You are an interloper." Mira nodded slowly. 17 cycles. "That's what, about 2 Earth years?" She glanced back at her flag, still standing by the creek. "I landed 43 hours ago, planted that flag this morning, filed the claim with the Galactic Registry at 600 local time, so technically I got here first." The figure's glow dimmed. "Impossible, our sensors detected no human presence when we entered orbit." "Yeah, I noticed you guys were running a pretty loud scan. I kept my lander's M signature low. Passive systems only, didn't want to spook anyone." She shrugged. "Your sensors probably filtered me out as background noise." One of the soldiers shifted, its rifle lowering slightly. The robed figure raised a hand and the soldier froze. "The doctrine of first presence," the figure said, "requires more than a mere flag. It requires occupation, infrastructure, proof of intent to settle and cultivate. A single human with a pole does not constitute a claim." Mira smiled. "Actually, according to subsection 4 of the Galactic Registry's settlement protocols, ratified by the Imperium, by the way, back when you joined the Council, occupation is defined as continuous presence and demonstrable intent to remain." "I've been here 43 hours, my lander's anchored. I've got a hydroponic setup running, a water purifier, and a shelter rated for extreme weather. I've even started a garden." She pointed toward a small patch of turned soil near her lander where rows of seedlings poked through the dirt. "Tomatoes, Earth variety, thought they'd do well here." The robed figure was silent for a long moment. Then it turned to one of the soldiers and spoke in a language Mira didn't recognize, sharp, clipped syllables that sounded like stones clicking together. The soldier tapped a device on its wrist and a holographic display flickered to life. Mira waited. The wind picked up, tugging at her hair. She could hear the creak behind her, the soft rustle of the violet flowers. The soldier spoke. The robed figure's glow flickered. Your claim, it said slowly, has been logged with the registry. The timestamp is verified. It paused. This is unexpected. Yeah, Mira said, I bet. The figure's eyes brightened again, sharper this time. The Imperium does not accept this. We will contest your claim through the Council. In the meantime, we will establish our own presence here. If you remain, you will be removed. Mira crossed her arms. You can try. But if you touch my flag or my lander or my tomatoes, you'll be in violation of registry law, and the Council doesn't look kindly on that. The robed figure stepped closer. Its shadow fell over her, long and dark. You are one human. We are 10,000. What makes you think you can hold this world? Mira met its gaze. Because I'm not trying to conquer it, she said quietly. I'm just trying to live here. The weight of empire the Imperium didn't leave. By the second day, they'd erected a perimeter around their landing zone, energy barriers shimmering like heat haze, guard towers bristling with sensors. Mira watched from her camp as more ships descended, disgorging construction drones and prefab habitats. The meadow began to fill with structures, all sharp angles and glowing edges like a city built from folded light. They didn't approach her again, not yet. Mira spent the morning tending her garden. The tomatoes were doing well, better than she'd expected. The soil here was rich, almost too rich, and the sun was gentle. She'd set up a small irrigation line from the creek, and the water ran clear and cold. She knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds, her hands stained green. At noon, a drone buzzed overhead. It was small, no bigger than her fist, with a sleek silver shell and a cluster of lenses on its underside. It hovered above her for a moment, scanning, then zipped away toward the Imperium's camp. Mira wiped her hands on her jeans and stood, watching it go. She wasn't surprised. They were mapping her setup, cataloging her resources, probably trying to figure out how she'd stayed hidden. She'd known this would happen. What she hadn't expected was the visitor that afternoon. He arrived on foot, alone, walking across the meadow with his hands raised. He wore no armor, just a simple tunic and trousers, both deep blue. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were a startling violet. He moved carefully, stepping around the flowers, his gaze fixed on Mira. She met him halfway, stopping a few meters from her lander. Can I help you? He lowered his hands. I am Kaler, envoy to the Vanguard fleet. I come unarmed and in good faith. Mira studied him. He was tall, maybe 2 meters, but his posture was open, non-threatening. His voice was softer than the robed figure's, almost tentative. Okay, she said. What do you want? To talk, Kaler said. The Imperium does not wish to escalate this situation, but we also cannot abandon our claim. This world is important to us. Important how? Kaler hesitated. It is unclaimed, pristine. Worlds like this are rare in the galaxy. Most habitable planets are already occupied or scarred by war or owned by powers too strong to challenge. Verdes 7 is a chance for the Imperium to expand peacefully, to grow. Mira nodded slowly, and me being here messes that up. Yes, she gestured toward the creek. Want to sit? Kaler blinked. Sit? Yeah, by the water. I've got tea. They sat on the flat stones, the creek murmuring between them. Mira poured tea from a thermos, herbal, something her grandmother used to make, and handed Kaler a cup. He sniffed it cautiously, then took a sip. His eyes widened. This is pleasant, he said. Mira smiled. Thanks, it's chamomile, helps with stress. They sat in silence for a while, watching the water. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the meadow. Mira could see the Imperium's camp in the distance, lights flickering to life as evening settled in. Why did you come here? Kaler asked finally. Alone, with so little. This is not a corporate venture. You are not part of a colony fleet. Why? Mira set her cup down. Because I wanted to, she said. Earth's crowded, noisy, everyone's always rushing somewhere, building something, tearing something else down. I just wanted a place that was quiet, where I could grow things, where I could breathe. Kaler was quiet for a moment. The Imperium does not understand this. We are many. We think in terms of fleets, territories, resources. The idea of one person seeking solitude is foreign to us. Maybe that's the problem, Mira said. Kaler looked at her. What do you mean? You're thinking like an empire, big. Loud, taking up space, but Verdes 7 doesn't need that. It's already perfect the way it is. She gestured toward the meadow, the mountains, the sky. You don't have to conquer it, you just have to let it be. Kaler set his cup down carefully. The Imperium will not withdraw, but perhaps there is a way to coexist. Mira raised an eyebrow. Go on. If you agree to cede a portion of the planet to the Imperium, say the northern continent, we could formalize a shared claim. You would retain sovereignty over your territory and we would have ours. The Council would accept this arrangement. Mira considered it. And if I say no, Kaler's expression darkened, then the Imperium will contest your claim. It will take years, decades perhaps. But we have resources you do not, legal teams, political influence. Eventually we will find a loophole and you will lose. Mira picked up her cup, sipped her tea. The chamomile was sweet on her tongue. You know what's funny, she said, you're trying to scare me. But all I hear is that you're afraid. Kaler stiffened. Afraid? Yeah, afraid that I might actually win. That one person with a flag and some tomatoes could outmaneuver your whole fleet. Because if that's true, it means your empire isn't as strong as you think. She met his gaze, and that terrifies you. Kaler stood abruptly. You are making a mistake, he said. His voice was tight, controlled. The Imperium does not lose. Mira stayed seated. We'll see. He turned and walked back toward the camp, his footsteps crunching on the grass. Mira watched him go, then looked down at the creek, at her reflection shimmering in the water. She'd known this wouldn't be easy, but she'd also known she was right, and that was enough, for now. The breaking point on the fourth day, the Imperium's lawyers arrived. They came in a smaller ship, sleek and polished, its hull inscribed with legal glyphs that glowed faint blue. The ship landed near the command tent, and a delegation of 4 figures emerged, each one taller than Kaler, dressed in robes that shimmered like oil slicks. They moved with precision, their steps synchronized, their faces expressionless. Mira watched from her camp. She'd been expecting this. The Imperium wouldn't use force, not yet, not while the Council was watching, but they'd use every legal trick they had. She spent the morning preparing. She pulled out her datapad, scrolled through the registry's settlement protocols, cross-referenced subsections and amendments. She'd memorized most of it during the flight here, but she reviewed it again, making notes, highlighting key passages. If they wanted a legal fight, she'd give them one. At noon, a drone delivered a message. A formal summons to a hearing to be held that evening in the command tent. Neutral ground. Observers from the Council would attend via HoloLink. Mira was required to present her case. She read the message twice, then deleted it. All right, she muttered, let's do this. The command tent was massive, its interior lit by floating orbs that cast no shadows. A long table stretched down the center, flanked by benches. The Imperium's delegation sat on one side, their robes pooling around them like liquid. Kaler sat at the far end, his expression unreadable. On the opposite side of the table, a single chair had been placed for Mira. At the head of the table, a hollow projector flickered to life, displaying the image of a council arbiter, a being made of crystalline facets, its voice a chorus of overlapping tones. This hearing will determine the validity of the contested claim on Verdes 7, the arbiter said. The Imperium asserts that the human claimant lacks the resources and intent required for legitimate settlement. The claimant will be given the opportunity to refute this assertion. Mira sat down, placed her datapad on the table, and looked at the delegation. I'm ready. The lead lawyer stood. Its voice was sharp, precise. The Calith Imperium has documented 17 cycles of survey and planning for this world. We have invested significant resources in identifying Verdes 7 as a viable settlement target. The human claimant arrived less than 100 hours ago with minimal infrastructure and no support network. Under subsection 7 of the settlement protocols, a claim must demonstrate sustained viability. A single individual cannot meet this threshold. Mira tapped her datapad. Subsection 7 defines sustained viability as the ability to maintain a presence for a minimum of 6 months without external resupply. I've got a hydroponic garden, a water purifier, a shelter, and enough seeds to last 2 years. I've already produced food. I'm self-sufficient. That's sustained viability. The lawyer's expression didn't change. You have no defensive capability, no means of protecting your claim from external threats. The planet is unclaimed precisely because it lies in a region contested by multiple powers. Without protection, your presence here is temporary. Mira leaned back. The registry doesn't require military capability, it requires intent and presence. I'm here, I'm staying, that's all the law asks. The lawyer turned to the arbiter. The Imperium requests a reassessment of the claimant's legal standing. A human with no institutional backing cannot hold a world against established powers. This is not a matter of law but of practicality. The Arbiter's facets shifted, light refracting through its form. Practicality is not a factor in registry law. The claimant's argument is sound. Unless the Imperium can demonstrate a legal precedent that invalidates the claim, the current standing will remain. The lawyer sat down, its movements stiff. The delegation conferred in low tones, their voices a hum Mira couldn't parse. Kaler stood. "May I speak?" The Arbiter inclined its head. "Proceed." Kaler looked at Mira, then at the delegation. "The Imperium has spent years preparing for this claim. Our people need this world. We are overcrowded, resource scarce. Verdes 7 represents hope for billions. One human should not be allowed to stand in the way of that." Mira met his gaze. "And what about my hope?" she said quietly. "I came here for the same reason you did. I needed a place to belong. Why is your need more important than mine?" Kaler hesitated. "Because we are many, you are one." "Exactly," Mira said. "You're many, you have 1,000 worlds, I have this one." She stood, her hands flat on the table. "You don't need Verdes 7, you want it. There's a difference." The Arbiter's facets pulsed. "The hearing is adjourned. The Council will review the arguments and issue a ruling within 10 cycles. The hollow projector flickered off. The tent fell silent. The delegation stood and filed out, their robes trailing behind them. Kaler lingered, his gaze fixed on Mira. "You are brave," he said, "but bravery will not save you if the Council rules against you." Mira picked up her datapad. "Then I guess I'll have to be stubborn too." Kaler left. Mira walked back to her camp, the meadow dark and quiet around her. She sat by the creek, her boots off again, her feet in the water. The stars were out, unfamiliar constellations stretched across the sky. She thought about Kaler's words, about the Imperium's need, about the possibility that she might lose, but then she looked at her flag, still standing, and she smiled. She wasn't going anywhere. The Garden's answer: the Imperium stopped building on the 5th day. Mira noticed it first in the silence. The hum of construction drones faded, replaced by the low murmur of voices and the soft rustle of wind through the meadow. She walked to the edge of her camp and looked across the field. The Imperium's structures were still there, towers and barriers and glowing habitats, but the workers had stopped. Soldiers stood at their posts, but they weren't moving. It was like the whole camp had frozen. She was still puzzling over it when Kaler appeared again, walking alone across the meadow. This time his expression was different, softer, almost uncertain. "Can we talk?" he asked. Mira gestured toward the creek. "Sure." They sat on the flat stones again, the water flowing between them. Kaler didn't speak for a long time. He just stared at the creek, his hands folded in his lap. "The Council has delayed its ruling," he said finally. "They want more evidence. They want to see if your claim is sustainable beyond the initial phase." Mira nodded. "How long?" 6 months. If you can maintain your presence for 6 months without external support, the claim will be upheld." Mira smiled faintly. "That's what I planned for anyway." Kaler looked at her. "You do not understand. The Imperium will not wait 6 months. The fleet will remain here, watching. If you falter, if your systems fail, if you run out of supplies, if anything goes wrong, they will move in. And you will lose." "I'm not going to falter," Mira said. Kaler shook his head. "You cannot know that. You are alone. One person cannot sustain a claim on a world like this indefinitely." Mira leaned back, her hands in the cool water. "You keep saying that. But you're wrong." She looked at him. "I'm not alone. I've got the planet, the soil, the water, the sun. That's all I need." Kaler was silent. Then slowly he said, "You truly believe that, don't you?" "Yeah," Mira said. "I do." Kaler stood. He walked to the edge of the creek, staring out at the meadow. "The Imperium does not understand you," he said, "and that makes them afraid." Mira stood too, brushing the dirt from her jeans. "Good." Over the next weeks, Mira fell into a rhythm. She woke with the sun, tended her garden, repaired her equipment. She expanded the hydroponic beds, planted more seeds, carrots, beans, lettuce. She built a small greenhouse from salvaged materials, its walls transparent and curved, catching the light. She set up a rainwater collection system, dug a shallow well near the lander. Every day she logged her progress on her datapad, filed updates with the registry. The Imperium watched. Drones buzzed overhead. Soldiers stood at the perimeter, silent and still, but they didn't interfere. At night, Mira sat by the creek and listened to the planet. The wind moving through the violet flowers, the distant call of something that might have been a bird or might have been something else entirely. The soft hum of her lander's reactor, steady and low. She thought about Earth, about her grandmother's garden, the rows of tomatoes and peppers and herbs, about the way her grandmother used to say that plants were teachers. They showed you how to be patient, how to trust the soil, how to let things grow in their own time. Mira had always thought of herself as someone who didn't belong anywhere, too restless for Earth, too small for the stars, but here on Verdes 7 she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt home. On the 40th day, Kaler visited again. This time he brought something with him, a small wooden box carved with intricate patterns. He handed it to Mira without a word. She opened it. Inside were seeds, dozens of them, all different shapes and colors. "What are these?" she asked. "From the Imperium's homeworld," Kaler said. "Crops that sustained us for millennia, flowers that bloom once every 10 years, trees that grow taller than your lander." He paused. "I thought you might want them for your garden." Mira looked at him, surprised. "Why would you give me these?" Kaler smiled faintly. "Because you were right, we do not need Verdes 7, we want it, but you need it, and that is worth something." Mira closed the box carefully. "Thank you." Kaler nodded. "The Imperium will not withdraw, but I think they are beginning to see you differently. Not as an obstacle, as something else." "What?" Mira asked. Kaler looked out at the meadow, at the violet flowers and the mountains and the sky. "A reminder," he said, "that sometimes the smallest things can hold the most ground." He left. Mira stood there holding the box, the seeds rattling softly inside. That night she planted the first one, a tree seed, dark and smooth, no bigger than her thumbnail. She dug a hole near the creek, placed the seed inside, covered it with soil. She poured water over it, watched the dirt darken and settle. "Grow," she whispered. "Grow big and strong, show them what we can do." The flag that held 6 months passed. The garden grew, tomatoes ripened, their skins splitting with sweetness. Carrots pushed up through the soil, their tops green and feathery. The greenhouse filled with lettuce and beans, the air inside warm and humid and alive. The tree from Kaler's seed sprouted, a slender sapling with silver leaves that caught the light like mirrors. Mira logged every meal, every harvest, every repair. She filed reports with the registry, time-stamped and detailed. She documented her water usage, her energy output, the structural integrity of her lander. She lived carefully, methodically, proving day by day that she could sustain herself. The Imperium's camp changed, too. The soldiers rotated out, replaced by engineers and scientists. The barriers came down. Drones stopped buzzing overhead. The camp shrank, condensing into a small research outpost near the northern edge of the meadow. Kaler visited once a week. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat by the creek, drinking tea, watching the water. On the 180th day, the council's ruling came through. Mira was in the greenhouse when her datapad chimed. She wiped her hands on her jeans, pulled the device from her pocket, and read the message. The claim was upheld. Mira Okonkwo was recognized as the legal sovereign of Verdes 7. The Imperium's contest was dismissed. The planet was hers. She read it twice, then set the datapad down. She walked outside into the meadow and stood beneath the sky. The flag was still there by the creek, the white canvas fluttering in the breeze. She'd won. Kaler arrived an hour later. He walked across the meadow slowly, his hands empty, his expression unreadable. When he reached her, he stopped and inclined his head. "Congratulations," he said. Mira smiled. "Thanks." They sat by the creek. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the meadow. The air smelled like mint and rain, just like it had that first day. "What will you do now?" Kaler asked. Mira looked at her garden, at the greenhouse, at the sapling tree with its silver leaves. "Keep growing things," she said. "Keep living here. Maybe build a bigger shelter. Maybe start a library. I don't know. I'll figure it out." Kaler nodded. "And the Imperium? What about them? Will you allow us to remain? The outpost, the researchers, we have learned much here. We would like to stay, if you permit it." Mira considered it. She thought about Kaler's seeds, the tree growing by the creek, the quiet weeks they'd spent sitting by the water. She thought about what he'd said, that she was a reminder. "You can stay," she said, "but no more fleets, no more conquest. If you're here, you're guests, you respect the planet, you respect what it is." Kaler smiled, agreed. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The sky turned orange, then pink, then deep violet. "You know," Mira said, "I used to think I was alone, that I'd always be alone, but I think I was wrong." Kaler looked at her. How so? I think being alone is different from being lonely. I'm alone here, but I'm not lonely because I've got this. She gestured toward the meadow, the garden, the creek, and that's enough. Kaler nodded slowly. Perhaps that is the lesson the Imperium needed to learn. Mira smiled. Maybe, years later when other ships came, traders, explorers, refugees, they would find Mira Okonkwo still there, her garden sprawling across the meadow, her flag still flying by the creek. They would find the Imperium's outpost too, quiet and small, its researchers working alongside her, planting trees and cataloging flowers. And they would hear the story, the girl who planted a flag, the empire that learned to let go, the planet that needed nothing but time. Mira's granddaughter would tell it best years after Mira was gone, standing beneath the silver-leafed tree that had grown taller than the lander. She would hold a seed in her palm, one of Kaler's, saved and passed down, and she would say, "My grandmother didn't win because she was strong. She won because she knew what mattered, and that was enough." The meadow would still be there, the violet flowers swaying in the breeze, the creek would still murmur, cool and clear, the flag would still stand, white canvas against the sky, and Verdes 7 would remain, unclaimed by conquest. Held by love.